Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're embarking on an in-depth exploration of Qualcomm Incorporated, a real powerhouse in semiconductors and telecommunications.
Yeah, absolutely. And our mission here is pretty clear. We're going to distill the key insights from a recent research report by Compascope. And we'll also weave in details from Qualcomm's latest Q2 fiscal 2025 earnings call. That was April 30th, 2025.
Okay.
The goal really is to pull out the most important nuggets, help you understand Qualcomm's core business, its competition, and what's really driving things forward for them.
Sounds good. We'll explore everything from their basic operations to their, well, pretty ambitious growth plans, the risks involved, and the latest trends. And we'll wrap up with some key factors for you to keep an eye on. Okay, let's dive right in. So when we hear Qualcomm, I think a lot of people immediately think smartphones, right? But it's obviously much more complex. How would you start describing what Qualcomm actually does?
Yeah, that's a good starting point. At its heart, Qualcomm is a semiconductor and telecommunications company. They specialize in advanced wireless tech, hardware, and crucially, intellectual property licensing.
Right, the patents.
Exactly. Think of them as being central to how your phone connects and increasingly how your car connects, how lots of smart devices communicate. Their business is kind of like a powerful dual engine. It's split into two main revenue streams.
Okay.
You've got QCT, which stands for Qualcomm CDMA Technologies. That's the semiconductor side, the chips. And then there's QTL, Qualcomm Technology Licensing. That's their huge patent licensing arm.
That split is really interesting, the chip design versus the licensing. Can you break down QCT a bit more? What are they actually building there?
Sure. Within QCT, there's a lot going on. You've got handsets, that's probably the best known part, Snapdragon application processors, baseband processors, the modems for 3G, 4G, 5G, basically the brains and the comms for most premium Android phones.
Okay, the high-end Android market.
Exactly. Then there's automotive solutions. This is a big growth area. It's driven by their Snapdragon digital chassis platform. That powers everything from in-cabin infotainment and car connectivity, 5G, Wi-Fi, to ADAS, advanced driver assistance systems.
And they're not stopping at phones and cars, right? They're pushing into other connected devices too.
Oh, absolutely. The Internet of Things, IoT, is huge for them. It covers consumer stuff like smart home gadgets, wearables, but also industrial IoT thinks smart manufacturing, robotics, and edge networking like Wi-Fi 7 access points. They've also really ramped up efforts in PC processors, using their ARM-based Snapdragon chips for Windows laptops, trying to challenge the incumbents there. And finally, within QCT, they're big into edge AI and XR that's extended reality.
Yeah.
So running AI directly on the device, not just in the cloud, and making processors for AR and VR headsets. It's becoming a really critical area.
Wow, okay, that's a lot under the QCT umbrella. So what about the other side, QTL, the licensing arm? That's always been a pretty unique and sometimes controversial part of their model.
It really is unique and highly profitable. QTL is all about licensing Qualcomm's massive portfolio of essential patents for cellular communication. We're talking 3G, 4G, 5G fundamentals. They have agreements with basically every major phone maker and OEM globally.
So they get a cut from almost every phone sold.
Pretty much, yeah. They collect royalties on a huge range of wireless devices worldwide. It's a very high-margin business, and it provides this substantial, stable revenue stream that, importantly, helps fund all that intense R&D we just talked about in QCT.
So essentially chips on one side, a powerful licensing engine on the other. They're incredibly broad in wireless and connectivity. What really stands out to you about that structure, especially thinking about the future?
Well, what's really remarkable, I think, is how it creates this virtuous cycle. The predictable high-margin revenue from QTL licensing gives them the capital to keep pouring money into cutting-edge R&D within QCT, which then lets them develop leading chips and platforms, which in turn generates new intellectual property, strengthening that patent portfolio even further. It's a self-sustaining innovation engine that's, frankly, very hard for competitors to replicate.
That makes a lot of sense, that synergy. Okay, shifting gears a bit. With such a wide reach across tech and markets, who are Qualcomm's main rivals, how do they actually stack up in this very competitive field?
Well, Qualcomm definitely has some strong competitive advantages. That defensible patent portfolio we just discussed is foundational, underpinning QTL and allowing those global royalties. Then there's the Snapdragon dominance in premium Android phones. That's still a major strength. Their 5G leadership is key, and they're already investing heavily in 6G looking ahead. And as we touched on, that strategic diversification into automotive and IoT is crucial. It makes them less dependent on just the smartphone market cycles.
But it can't be all clear skies. What are the big headwinds or challenges they're facing?
No, definitely not. You're right. There are significant challenges. One of the biggest looming ones is Apple's move to in-house modems. Apple's been a huge customer for Qualcomm modems. So that transition, especially after fiscal 2026, is a pretty substantial risk to that specific revenue stream.
Yeah, that seems like a big deal.
It is. And beyond just the revenue, it's a test of their patent power. Can they still get royalties, even if Apple uses its own modems? That could set a precedent. Then there's just increasing competition generally. MediaTek and Samsung are strong in the lower and mid-tier phone segments.
Right.
And you've got NVIDIA pushing hard into automotive and edge AI, areas Qualcomm sees as growth drivers. Plus, regulatory scrutiny over the QTL licensing practices pops up periodically around the world. That's an ongoing risk. And finally, just the broader macro and geopolitical risks, things like economic cycles affecting demand or U.S.-China trade tensions. Those are always there for semiconductor companies.
Okay, let's try and connect that to specific competitors. How do they really compare head to head, say, against Apple?
Well, with Apple, their strength is that vertical integration, designing their own A-series, M-series chips, and they're developing their own 5G modems. The challenge for Apple, though, seems to be delays. Their modem development hasn't matched Qualcomm's decades of expertise yet. Then you have MediaTek, very strong and cost-effective low and mid-tier 5G phones. But they don't have Qualcomm's dominance in the premium tier or that big licensing revenue stream or the same level of diversification.
And what about the giants like NVIDIA? People talk about them a lot in AI and data centers.
Right. NVIDIA dominates GPUs, AI, especially for data centers, and they're making big inroads in automotive ADS. But importantly, they don't compete in smartphone processors or have a licensing business like QTL. Their focus is different. Broadcom is another major player, strong in RF tech, network infrastructure, very strong ties with Apple. But that Apple dependence is also a risk for them. And their growth often comes through acquisitions, which brings its own integration challenges.
Okay, and the traditional PC guys, Intel, AMD.
Intel and AMD still rule the traditional PC and server CPU world, but they have limited exposure to wireless tech. And they're generally less competitive in the low-power ARM-based chip space, where Qualcomm is pushing with Snapdragon for PCs. Finally, you have companies like Skyworks Solutions and Qorvo, strong in specific RF components, but they're very reliant on smartphone cycles and vulnerable if phone makers decide to bring RF design in-house.
So, summing up the competitive landscape.
I'd say Qualcomm's overall competitive edge looks pretty defensible. It's built on that 5G leadership, the deep IP portfolio, and this diversified strategy across multiple growth areas. It makes them arguably more resilient than many peers who are more focused on single markets.
That paints a really clear picture. Now, this is where it gets exciting, right? The future. How exactly does Qualcomm plan to grow, especially moving beyond that traditional smartphone base?
Their growth strategy is definitely diversified and leverages those existing strengths we talked about. In automotive, they're setting some really ambitious targets, aiming for $8 billion in revenue by fiscal 29, maybe $9 billion by fiscal 31. And that's backed by their Snapdragon digital chassis platform. They keep highlighting this massive $45 billion design win pipeline they've built up. That's essentially future business already committed.
That $45 billion figure is huge for automotive. What about IoT and PCs? Those seem like big bets too.
They are. For IoT, the target is $14 billion by fiscal 2029. That's like a 21% compound annual growth rate. Huge potential. And that covers consumer IoT, industrial networking, and includes those PC processors and AR/VR chips too. On PC growth specifically, they're aiming for $4 billion by fiscal 29 with those premium ARM-based Snapdragon chips for Windows laptops.
Okay. And handsets, are they just maintaining there or still pushing?
In handsets, it's still foundational, of course, but the focus is shifting more towards premium-tier Android growth, and integrating AI into Snapdragon processors is key. They're clearly planning for a future with, let's say, limited reliance on Apple modem revenue post-fiscal 2026.
And it really sounds like AI is threaded through almost everything they're doing now.
Absolutely. It's central. They're pushing hard for AI on edge devices. Leadership in running AI inference directly on the device. So on Snapdragon-powered IoT gadgets, PCs, smartphones. It fits that trend of moving AI processing out of the cloud and closer to the user. And even for licensing, QTL, they see stable growth coming from 4G, 5G upgrades, especially in emerging markets, and eventually royalties from 6G. It keeps that high-margin engine running.
These are definitely ambitious targets across the board. How achievable do you think they really are, and what are the main risks to pulling it off?
Well, the achievability gets some credibility from tangible progress, like that huge $45 billion automotive design win pipeline. That's
Yeah.
not just talk. It represents future deals. But yeah, the risks are real. Intense competition, particularly from NVIDIA and Broadcom in these new markets.
Right.
The ongoing trend of OEMs trying vertical integration, like Apple. Maintaining that performance edge consistently is always a challenge. And then those external factors, macroeconomic headwinds, geopolitical tensions, those can always throw a wrench in the works. But compared to peers who might be more concentrated, Qualcomm's diversified approach across auto, IoT, and ARM PCs does offer, I think, stronger long-term potential. It gives them more ways to win.
Okay, so with these big plans comes the challenge of actually making it happen. Execution risk. What are the specific execution risks for Qualcomm, and how do those stack up against their rivals?
Well, several key ones stand out. First, customer dependency. We talked about Apple. They need to successfully offset that potential loss by growing fast enough elsewhere. Second, competition. It's just getting tougher, not just in phones, but in automotive, IoT. They have to keep out innovating strong players. Third, regulatory scrutiny. That risk around the QTL licensing business hasn't gone away. Legal challenges or new regulations could impact profitability.
So managing customer shifts, competition, regulation, what else?
Yeah. Then there's the diversification challenge itself. Scaling up in completely new markets like automotive and IoT isn't easy. It requires sustained R&D, winning those design contracts, and then actually converting them into large-scale, reliable revenue streams. That takes time and focus. And of course, macroeconomic exposure. Semiconductor demand is cyclical. Global economic slowdowns or specific issues like U.S.-China trade friction can hit them hard.
How do these risks look when you compare them across the industry? Are Qualcomm's risks higher or lower than, say, NVIDIA or Intel?
It's interesting to compare. Apple, for instance, probably has higher execution risk, specifically on their internal modem development, since it's new for them. But their overall business is incredibly resilient due to services, wearables, etc. MediaTek faces tech gaps in the premium phone tier and margin pressure below that. They lack Qualcomm's diversification, maybe making their risks more concentrated. NVIDIA is heavily reliant on the sometimes volatile GPU and AI data center markets. Plus, they face challenges scaling up in automotive against established players like Qualcomm.
Okay, and the others.
Broadcom, as we mentioned, relies heavily on Apple and acquisitions, bringing concentration and integration risks. Intel, you could argue, faces the highest execution risk right now, given the ongoing struggles and delays with their process technology roadmap. That's fundamental. And Skyworks Qorvo are very exposed to smartphone cycles and the risk of OEMs doing more RF in-house. So all things considered, Qualcomm's execution risk seems maybe moderate compared to many peers. That diversification strategy and deep wireless know-how really do help spread the risk.
Okay, let's make this really current. Let's bring in the details from their latest earnings call, Q2 fiscal 25, from back in April. What were the main takeaways about their recent performance and the business trends they highlighted?
Yeah, the Q2 call showed pretty strong financials. They reported non-GAAP revenues of $10.8 billion and non-GAAP EPS of 2.85 cents. Both beat expectations. The QCT chip segment was the main driver, $9.5 billion in revenue. Handsets did well, but the real standouts were automotive, up a huge 59% year over year.
59%, wow.
Yeah, impressive growth. And IoT was also strong, up 27% year over year. QTL, the licensing side, was stable at $1.3 billion.
And it sounds like AI was a huge theme on that call, really positioning for the future. What specifically did they talk about?
Oh, AI was everywhere. They emphasized the rapid generative AI proliferation, especially smaller models from Microsoft, Google, Meta, Alibaba, running directly on Snapdragon platforms, this whole AI on device push. In mobile innovation, they launched the Bi-85 platform. They're calling it the world's most advanced AI-powered modem for Android, promising faster 5G, better AI experiences. Google apparently called it the perfect match for Android in the Gemini era. High praise. They also mentioned 90 flagship phone designs using their top-tier Snapdragon 8 Elite chip and pointed to new devices like the Motorola Razr integrating various AI services.
Okay. And what about the PC side? Did they give any concrete updates on traction there?
They did. For PC progress, they reiterated that $4 billion target by FY29. They said they have over 85 PC designs using Snapdragon either in production or development now, aiming for over 100 designs by 2026. And they shared a stat. Snapdragon PCs apparently hit about 9% market share for Windows laptops, priced above $600 in key markets during Q1 2025.
9%. That's starting to be noticeable.
It is. And the software ecosystem is growing over 750 native apps, 1,400 games optimized. Plus, Microsoft's bringing new Copilot plus AI features first to Snapdragon X PCs. That's a significant endorsement.
Definitely. What about other areas? XR, automotive?
Yeah, for XR, they mentioned good consumer feedback on smart glasses. Over 15 designs out there with partners. Meta's Ray-Ban glasses are adding AI. Samsung's got an Android XR headset coming. They seem confident about hitting $2 billion in XR revenue by FY29. And automotive growth continues strong. Demand for the digital chassis is high. They secured 30 new design wins just in the quarter, including 5 for ADS systems and deals with Chinese EV makers like NIO and Great Wall. Lots of new vehicle launches using their tech. New partnerships, too.
And industrial IoT. You mentioned that was a strong growth driver in the quarter.
Exactly. Industrial IoT, IIoT had a strong Q2. They announced a cool collaboration with Palantir, integrating enterprise data and AI on edge platforms for real-time insights in factories. They also made a couple of acquisitions, Edge Impulse, which is an edge AI development platform with a large developer community, and Focus AI for computer vision, and launched a new 5G fixed wireless access platform, Dragonwing Gen 4 Elite, with a dedicated AI coprocessor delivering 40 TOPS, that's trillions of operations per second. They're still aiming for $4 billion in IoT revenue by FY29.
Okay, quite a lot of positive updates. What did they guide for the next quarter, Q3?
For Q3 fiscal 25, the guidance was revenues between $9.9 billion and $10.7 billion. Non-GAAP EPS between $2.60 and $2.80. They expect QCT revenue to grow about 12% year over year, again led by handsets, IoT, and automotive. On the macro front and tariffs, they basically said their guidance reflects the current situation. They don't see material direct impact thanks to their diversified supply chain. Monitoring things, but no major customer order pull-ins reported.
And any news on returning cash to shareholders?
Yes, they actually announced they're increasing their capital return target, aiming to return 100% of free cash flow to shareholders in fiscal 2025. That signals strong confidence in their cash generation.
Okay. And the elephant in the room? Any update on the Huawei royalty situation?
No, nothing new reported on the Huawei royalty negotiations during the call. That remains ongoing, it seems.
All right, so as we start to wrap this up, for anyone trying to really understand Qualcomm's path forward, what are the absolute critical factors to watch? What matters most?
Based on the compass scope analysis and everything we've discussed, here are the key things to monitor, kind of in order of significance or uncertainty. Number one, absolutely, is Apple's transition to in-house modems. High uncertainty here. The potential financial hit is big. Watching whether Apple succeeds, if their modems perform well, and crucially, if Qualcomm can still collect royalties, that's critical.
Okay, Apple modems top the list. What's next?
Second, those regulatory and legal risks to licensing, QTL. Medium to high uncertainty. New disputes or antitrust actions could really impact those high-margin royalties. Third, smartphone market dynamics, medium uncertainty. Things like how often people upgrade, demand for premium phones, 5G adoption, these still drive a big chunk of Qualcomm's revenue. Fourth, competitive dynamics in both core and emerging markets, medium to high uncertainty. Can Snapdragon maintain its edge against MediaTek, NVIDIA, the ARM PC players? Market share battles are key.
Right. What about executing on those big growth plans?
Exactly. Fifth is automotive pipeline execution. Medium uncertainty. They have that huge $45 billion pipeline, but they need to convert it smoothly into actual revenue and keep winning new deals. Sixth, scaling the IoT business. Also medium uncertainty. Hitting that $14 billion target is ambitious. It depends on widespread enterprise adoption of edge AI and connectivity in what are often very fragmented markets. And seventh, just broader macroeconomic factors. Medium uncertainty. Economic downturns hitting consumer electronic spending, that's always a risk.
Makes sense. Any other major factors to keep an eye on?
Yeah, a few more. Eighth, geopolitical and trade factors. Medium to high uncertainty. Qualcomm has significant exposure to Chinese customers, making them vulnerable to U.S.-China tensions or disruptions. Ninth, maybe less immediate but still relevant, ARM architecture control risk. Low to medium uncertainty. Any major disputes over ARM licensing could cause problems down the line. And finally, 10th, supply chain and manufacturing dependence, medium uncertainty. Relying on foundries like TSMC for the most advanced chips carries risks of disruptions or cost increases.
Wow. Okay, that was definitely a deep dive. From their pretty complex business segments and navigating that tough competitive landscape to pushing hard into new growth areas like automotive and edge AI, Qualcomm clearly has a lot going on.
It really does. Their strategy of diversifying away from just smartphones, combined with what seems like strong execution in these newer markets, plus continued AI innovation, It really positions them uniquely in the semiconductor world. That balance they strike between the robust IP licensing, QTL, and the expanding chip solutions, QCT, across so many industries, that really is their core strength, I think.
So what's the big takeaway here for you, the listener? As you think about everything we've unpacked, consider that dynamic interplay between leading-edge technology and actual market adoption. Qualcomm is making a huge bet on AI moving to the edge onto your devices, and on everything around us getting smarter, from cars to factories. This isn't just about speed, it's about making devices more intelligent and personal, often without needing the cloud.
Yeah, and maybe a final thought to leave you with. How might this rapid advance of on-device AI, which Qualcomm is championing, actively start to reshape the whole competitive landscape, even for the big cloud-based AI players? It's a really interesting question. Where will innovation and value creation really happen in the next few years? On the device, in the cloud, or somewhere in between? It could profoundly shift things.
That's a great point to ponder. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Qualcomm. We hope this gave you a useful shortcut to understanding their complex journey. Until next time. This content is produced by Compasscope.com. For more than 1,100 public listed companies, find detailed research reports, visual mind maps, earnings call analysis, and audio discussions on Compasscope.com.